Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's roundtable discussion on the topic point-of-care manufacturing models, GMP aspects and regulatory pathways. Thank you for being with us. I'm Georgia Fodeyanaki, Product Manager for Immunotherapy at Miltenyi Biotec, and I will be your moderator for this session. Let's take a look at today's agenda. We'll begin with presentations from our three distinguished speakers, followed by a live Q&A session where you will have the opportunity to engage with them directly. Our speakers today are Cristina Conforti Andreoni, serving as the Marketing Manager for Portfolio Strategy in Immunotherapy and Miltenyi Biotec, who will walk us through access to cell and gene therapy and point-of-care manufacturing models. Then Bernd Schroeder follows as the Global Head of Regulatory Affairs at Miltenyi Biotec with a short talk on basics of GMP regulation and manufacturing considerations. And lastly, we have Erwan Jikel, who serves as the Government Affairs Lead for Europe at Miltenyi Biomedical. He will be speaking on regulatory and legal paths for hospital manufacturing of ATMPs. Then we will move into an interactive Q&A session and discussion. Before we begin, please take a moment to review the disclaimer displayed on the screen. This disclaimer refers to our Miltenyi Biotec products and services. Please note that any clinical application of the target cells remains the responsibility of the user of the Clinimax system. And the second disclaimer, all information, interpretations, views, and opinions contained in this presentation are based on a careful review and professional judgment of the source of information cited by the presenter and the time of the presentation. And the Miltenyi Group is not liable for any interpretation, views, or opinions expressed in this presentation. So let's get started with Cristina Conforti Andreoni, who will take us through access to cell and gene therapy and point-of-care manufacturing models. Cristina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Georgia, and welcome to everyone. Today's topic is point-of-care manufacturing, and is obviously a very complicated topic. But before discussing how and so what is point-of-care manufacturing, let's discuss also why it is needed. As you know, cell and gene therapies are very promising therapies that have been very effective and becoming more and more safe. However, it is not ideal to have a therapy that is perfectly working in patients, and then basically there is not enough access, so patient cannot receive it either because it's not available, affordable, or universal. So the new trend in the last years is really to put back the patient at the center of the picture and design therapies that are also accessible. And why cell and gene therapies are not accessible? For several reasons, which we can see here. First of all, as you well know, cell and gene therapies are mostly not approved or not registered in majority of countries in the world. Where the therapies are available, however, there are several reasons why patients do not receive the therapy effectively. First of all, especially in the first year after launch, the pharmaceutical company are not able to provide enough therapies for everybody that is prescribed with the therapy for capacity reasons. Secondly, it happens sometimes that patients are fast progressing, so they are not able to receive the therapy back because they progress too fast, or even they die before the cells come back to the hospital. There are also problems with the eligibility criteria. So many of these therapies have a very small label, in a sense, very narrow label, in the sense that only patients with certain criteria would be accepted, although it is proven also by clinical trials that even other patients that fall out of the label would be able to benefit from them. And finally, patients often wish to stay close home, and they don't feel like, or they don't even can afford to really travel near the next accredited hospital. And since there are not enough accredited hospitals distributed over regions and countries, often patients basically do not enter in the therapy program at all. So often when we talk about access in terms of registration and reimbursement. We think this is as a problem of middle and low-income countries. However, it is also clear that even in European Union, we are facing this problem. As you know, cell and gene therapies as advanced medicinal product, they need to be approved centrally by European Parliament. And the 6 CAR-T therapies you see here are actually therapies that have been approved centrally. However, of the 27 member states that you see here, only very few, in fact, only Germany basically have access to every application of this therapy for every indication. For the therapies of CAR-T therapies for multiple myeloma, you see that there is a very limited access. And also, basically, in the lower part of this table, you see there are countries that basically do not have effectively access to therapies at all, creating also a very controversial situation where citizens in European Union have different access to approved therapies. If we then zoom in into the situation of countries that are lucky enough to have the therapy reimbursed and available, like Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, there's still a lot of gaps and patients not receiving it. These are data from 2020. These are where the patient treated at the time. And as you can see, in fact, only half or even less than half of the eligible patients receive it. All the parts here you see in the upper part of the graph is basically patients that didn't receive the therapy, although being eligible for it for the reason we mentioned before: limited availability, fast progressing diseases, and no possibility to move near the next hospital accredited. However, is another layer to it. At the moment of approval, the EMA suggests a label, then each country interpret basically and define the specific label for the therapy. And it is interesting to see that actually the original label approved was actually much bigger than the one effectively used. And this is because countries also try to restrict their reimbursement also for economical reasons. If you then add on top all the patients that have slightly different indication, like a slightly different type of non-Hodgkin lymphoma in this case, or ALL, or patients with autoimmune diseases that are proven to be actually effectively treatable with CAR-T CD19, you see that each hospital actually really thrive to and would like to treat more patients than what are actually treated by commercial therapies. So given that a majority of cell therapy are developed in hospitals, many hospitals are already equipped with the right point-of-care manufacturing knowledge and instrumentation to start their own program of point-of-care. However, the point about decentralized and point-of-care manufacturing is that, in fact, seems an easy solution, but it's very complex because it can follow different regulatory and legal models. So we are going to touch on these differences. To really understand the difference and the difficulties of point-of-care manufacturing, we also need to understand the complex and a complex ecosystem that is behind the regulatory and legal framework of cell and gene therapies. Here we show the example of Europe, but it's actually quite similar in many other countries. First of all, cell and gene therapies follow specific regulation at the level of manufacturing license, as we're going to touch also later with Bernd in his part. But there are also other complex regulations that support the cell and gene therapies, for example, the medical device, substance of human origin, which is the apheresis product, and also the modified organism directive at European level. And the issue here is that there are different bodies and different regulators, different legislators, and different ways to enforce this therapy depending on these rules, depending on the regulation. In the case of the clinical trials, then there are also a lot of other guidelines to follow. And of course, the central marketing authorization is a complex path that is supervised by the EMA and then approved by the European Parliament. And finally, if a drug is going all the way to approval, the game is not over at all, because there are so many other rules and legislation that to be followed, like market access policies, pharmacovigilance, reimbursement, and also the legal ownership and liability of the drug. So you see, this is already complex for a pharmaceutical company to follow. And if you imagine a clinician trying to go through this, you see that it's quite a difficult exercise for many of the academic sites to pursue. In fact, for a clinician that decide to establish a point of care for a specific experimental therapy, there are pretty much three ways in front. The classical way clinicians bring a therapy into clinical trials is for a scope of innovation. So the academic hospital university, of course, want to discover and invent new way to treat patients. Here, the regulatory framework is relatively easier, so to say. There's an early clinical trial to be established, and then the scope is to have an exit strategy. For example, selling the asset to and licensing the IP to a biotech or industry, or start a spin-off from the university. However, as we saw before, there are so many patients that actually cannot access therapies, and often the clinician really wish to go into programs that allow them to treat patients also with a classical CAR TCD90, for example, beyond the innovation scope. And this is we could call it hospital treatment scope. Here, the problem is that beyond the clinical trials, the academic side need to find a way to get reimbursement and to get this therapy sustainable. And this is what Erwan will discuss later, will show you later in terms of early access program and hospital exemption. There is also a third very high mountain that a clinician can explore, and this is the marketing authorization. As you know, there are some sites in Europe that are trying this direction, and the EMA is supporting it. Of course, this path is quite complex because it's the same identical path that the pharmaceutical industry follow, and it has a lot of regulatory framework around it. Now, what is important for this conversation today and for the point of care and to define the point of care models is that these are all three examples of point of care, but they have a different size in terms also of manufacturing capacity. In the first two cases, we are talking about a small routine use, but in the third case in the center here, we are talking about a very extensive distribution of the product. So the suggestion for this webinar here is to imagine the point of care models distributed in 4 options here, and to describe them based on the routine or no routine, so the scale, and also the indication and incidence, which is also related to the interest by pharmaceutical industry. So the classical innovation hub I showed before will go for a small scale and will try to do just early trials and then sell the assets. The hospital treatment on non-routine use would be for early access program that treat maybe ultra rare diseases or gene therapies where there's a lower interest from a pharmaceutical industry. And then the third option is a non-profit network that try to extend the distribution of manufacturing and go maybe even to a marketing authorization. And this could be true, for example, for emerging countries, emerging economies. And the third and the fourth option is where pharmaceutical industry actually is in the lead of the commercialization. And this we could even describe as franchise model. So now the third and fourth example here, so the lower part of the graph, could also be described as distributed manufacturing. Let's make it finally a clarification about all this terminology. So the classical industry currently is doing centralized manufacturing with one or few private facility as CDMO manufacturing for the drug. At the same time, hospitals are running the classical explorative trials in point of care, a single site, but they're also exploring this multi-site point of care. Now, what it could happen next is that industry also look into decentralization, and this could be done in 2 ways, either by this classical decentralization will replicate quality, or central quality oversight that is by the definition of the FDA called distributed manufacturing. And this then, interestingly, could be decided to be done either as private facility or as multi-site manufacturing in a point of care facility, point of care hospital. So now with this, I hope I've given you some clarity about the definition of point of care and regulatory framework. And I would like to invite Bernd to introduce the topic of manufacturing license, the guidelines, the status of the art, and also the potential future development.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. So then I will take over. Today I will really focus on the regulatory part, but also on the GMP aspects. What is important to get a manufacturing license and which kind of clean room are required. But nevertheless, the most important is to manufacture an ATMP. There's always a risk-based approach according to GMP for ATMP. The GMP manufacturing license is always a basis. So without a GMP manufacturing license, you can't produce a drug. Therefore, you have to do everything like validation, qualification of your validation of the process, qualification of equipment, and at the end you have the manufacturing license. If you have the manufacturing license, then you can ask for the clinical trial, and if you have done the clinical trials, you can ask for the marketing authorization or have an alternative path to release your product. But at the end, you have also to think about reimbursement of your product. But before I go into detail, I want just to mention some definitions, because ATMPs are medicines for human use that are based on genes, tissue, or cells. They often are groundbreaking new opportunities to treat diseases. Very important, if you produce an ATMP, the variability of starting material is important. So if you change the starting material, that can have a big influence of your product. You have often very complex manufacturing process, therefore automation is a key aspect to have robust process and show reproducibility. But nevertheless, due to the starting material, your like the leukapheresis, you have some degree of variability of your drug product at the end. And especially for ortholog products, you have a limited batch size of 1 or 2 products for one patient. And all these is described in the GMP for ATMP, Eudralex Volume 4, Part 4, GMP for ATMP. And I will go in some of these 17 chapters to explain more in detail. These guideline is mandatory for all medicinal products that have be granted as marketing authorization, but it's also mandatory for investigation and medicinal products. They have also to be used according to GMP. So before getting the manufacturing license, you have always to develop your process. You have to develop your QC assay. The final QC says the process has to be transferred to your GMP facility to be GMP compliant. Then you have to validate your process, qualify your assays, and at the end, go to the authority, ask for the manufacturing license. In Chapter 5 of these Eudralex Volume 4, Part 4, equipment, consumables, should be suitable for its intended purpose and not bring any hazard to the product. So therefore, to take the right equipment, to take the right consumable is very important. The requirements of equipment for integrity, qualification, and maintenance, as well as clean area for connection under aseptic connections have to be defined. Documentation. All activities that may affect product quality needs to be documented, controlled, monitored, and data integrity, so also the computer, to be ensured. Includes requirement for different types of documentation, means specification has to be written, records has to be done. It includes provision for the traceability for data retention of documentation. Last but not least, starting and raw material. Defines the requirement for start and raw materials regarding their quality, their specification, their labeling, and their release. You need specific specification quality requirements for every product that you put into your product or put into your manufacturing process. When the first customers or first cell factories are started, it was clearly defined because you have no aseptic, no closed system. You have to produce every product in one clean room, and therefore you need a lot of clean rooms to produce a lot of products. So, but if you have a closed system, then you can reduce the requirements a lot, and therefore we have developed the Prodigy tubing set system. And this is a single-use system, which is really closed system with all components as part of this system. And all raw materials and starting materials are connected directly to this tubing set. By using such a tubing set, you have less open hanging step and you have less interaction with your automated workflow. Therefore, the requirements are much reduced. So you can work with the Prodigy system according to these guidelines in a Class C or D clean room. And you can also realize a ballroom concept. Therefore, it's much easier to enable decentralized or point-of-care manufacturing of ATMP. So if you look into the guideline, chapter 9.4, aseptic manufacturing, general principles, manufacturing should take place in clean room areas of appropriate environmental cleanness level, especially production in a closed system. A background clean area of grade D is acceptable. When materials are added or withdrawn from the closed system without an aseptic connection, the system can no longer be considered closed. So if using sterile connection or filters to couple media to this tubing set, you are working in a closed system, and therefore you can establish your manufacturing in a Class D clean room environment. So we have done a lot during design and development of the product. So we have done underwater integrity tests. We have done tensile strength tests of our tubing set, container closure integrity tests with media, but also with blue dyes. We have done impermeability tests of the centrifugal unit, bioseal tests of the centrifugal unit to show really that our tubing set is a closed system. During routine use for the manufacturing of every tubing set, we have an integrity test of the column, of the centrifugal unit, of the heat exchange cartridge, and also every product bag. And every tubing set is tested also on the integrity. That means you can be sure that if you're using our Prodigy tubing set, that it's a closed system. So therefore, the CleanWorks Prodigy tubing set provides a barrier against bacteria, water, bioaerosols, and also liquid. Therefore, working with a closed system enables you to produce in a Class D environment. And here are some examples. This is the clean room in Bergisch Gladbach. We have granted the manufacturing license in March 2018. This is a Class C clean room, ballroom concept, and you can produce several different CAR T cells in this clean room. And you see we have several prodigies in the same room. This is a clean room, the ballroom concept in San Jose, and this is a clean room of our customer Autolus Therapeutics, who gotten marketing authorization by the FDA last year. So therefore, with an automated manufacturing closed system, you can work in the ballroom concept. To help you to getting the manufacturing license, we have prepared a lot of documents. So for every product at Miltenyi, you can get a product information file. The product information file is a description of the product, how we manufacture the product, all raw materials which are used to manufacture the product specification. We have summarized the stability and safety information, and every product information file is signed by me. But if you need more information, like DMSO resistance of our tubing set, we have also amendment of these product information files. You get the product information files by the Global Tech Support, and if you need more information, we have regulatory affairs documents and PIF amendments to support you with more detail. So Global Tech Support will ask regulatory affairs to send you the documentation. But if you really need help to discuss with the authority why our Prodigy tubing set is a closed system, then we can help you also by the direct contact to the authority. We have summarized all the requirements for the clean rooms in the new product information file 252. There's a summary of all the requirements for clean rooms, but we have also included our ballroom concept as a self-factory in San Jose, in Bergisch Gladbach, and also results of Autolus. We have also included a summary or of the customers who established ballroom concept in Class C or D worldwide, and give also some examples like Barcelona, Canada, India, Thailand, or US, where they established really the project in a Class C or a Class D clean room. Hopefully this helps you really to convince the authority to establish your prodigy in a Class C or clean room, because this reduces a lot of energy, a lot of costs for the manufacturing in establishing of the clean room. We are talking a lot with authorities. So we were at the FDA to discuss the point of care. We are working with the EMA But this also, I was last week at the MHRA to discuss there the new guidance documents for the point of care. And we are also in close contact with the German authorities, really to help you as customer and also to working on the new guidance. We are not talking alone only with the authorities. We are also in part of the initiatives here in EU, like T2 Involve or GoCard, really to push forward the idea of point-of-care manufacturing. With this, I would like to switch from GMP and regulatory to more legal aspects. So please, Arwan, take over.
Thank you, Bernd. Good morning. So my part after Bernd's section on the manufacturing and manufacturing authorization is related to the ways to place ATMPs and on the market and provide patient access to them. So we'll basically I'll give you an overview of the different pathways that exist. Obviously, the central marketing authorization, which is mandatory for ATMPs at European level, but also the alternative regulatory pathways that exist as defined in the law. And here we speak about compassionate use programs, named patient, and hospital exemption. So when we speak about ATMPs, it's just a slight reminder about which product do we speak about. It's not only cell and gene therapies, but also tissue engineered products and combined ATMPs. And this is defined obviously in the legislation, but it's important to recall that those ATMPs are very different as well, and they come with their own specificities and challenges. So this slide basically is an overview of which regulatory pathways are existing at European level for, on one hand, the pink part speaks about authorized medicinal products. That's true for ATMPs as well. And when we speak about ATMPs, we speak about central marketing authorization, which is given by the European Commission after a review and assessment by the EMA. So it's EU-wide. The initiation is obviously by the manufacturing holder, the market authorization holder, very often a pharmaceutical company. The liability is on it. And there are lots of requirements which relate to obviously manufacturing, pharmacovigilance, traceability, distribution, and the legal framework is under the pharma legislation, which is today the two directives, 2001/83 and regulation. When we speak about medicinal products which are without a marketing authorization, which are not authorized yet, we speak about clinical trials. Obviously, these are the drugs that are basically undergoing the evaluation or the development before going or filing for central marketing authorization, but they are not authorized yet. So of interest today, we have, and the two of them are basically, I would say, used under the SMPC or the clinical trial application for the clinical trials. For drugs which are not with a marketing authorization, obviously it's an exceptional use. We have the early access programs, and here we speak about compassionate use programs and named patient programs as defined by, for the compassionate use program, the Article 83 of the regulation, and for the named patient program by the Article 3.5 of the directive. As I said, it's it's exceptional use. For the compassionate use program, it's for groups of patients. For the named patient programs, it's for individual patients. Particularity or the differentiation here between the two is not only the cohort for the compassionate use program or the individual patients for the NPP, but also the compassionate use programs as defined in the law are initiated by the sponsor, by the manufacturer who bear the liability. There are some exceptions here, only Italy, where the CUP can be initiated by a group of physicians under Law 648, but in general, this is the case. For these two programs, the individual national competent authorities, the national authorities decide whether or not to approve the use of this medicinal product without marketing authorization. For the CUP, important, they must be undergoing clinical trial or waiting marketing authorization. So we speak about that phase where the drug is about to be on the market, but not all the authorization are not given, or they are waiting to have the pricing and reimbursement agreement with the national authority. So there are some programs in place, like formerly called ATU in France, for instance. Now it's called AAP and AAC, which provide the possibility to have those drugs earlier for a given therapeutic indication. Also happen outside of innovative drug, you would have possibility for non-innovative drugs. All drugs could be used when they meet a medical need, for instance, off-label. So this is the case for the compassionate use programs and the NPPs, and of course for ATMPs there is the specific regulatory pathway which is called the hospital exemption. I'm sure you all know about that. The particularity is that it is authorized at national level. So we spoke about the manufacturing authorization on the one hand with Bernd earlier, but also the use is authorized at national level. It's defined in the ATMP regulation, also the directive, and they refer to products that are exempt from the requirements of the directive for placing and going through the central marketing authorization. And here we speak about non-routine use on hospital level, within the same member state, under the responsibility of the physician for individual patients. And importantly, you have different requirements. For instance, for the quality standards, the law says it has to be equivalent to those of the community level. And there are also national traceability and pharmacovigilance. So what we see that there are differences in interpretation and implementation at national level as well. And for the CUP as well, I mean, and the NPPs, you have a variety of different cases across member states. And I think that's the difficulty here is that you have national and EU legal requirements, but for the compassionate use program hospital exemption, you have a very patchwork of different cases, country by country. So that makes it complex to follow. I think it's an interesting link that you should have a look at it if you're interested. The HMA, the Heads of Medicines Agency, provides that list of national guidance for the compassionate use programs and NPPs, and it's accessible online. You have that country by country. So there is the revision of, so what I spoke about earlier is the current state of the legislation and regulatory obligations as it stands. But as you may know, there is a revision of the European Pharmaceutical Framework, and there are some new parts which are important for you to know about. It's not final because it has still to be adopted by the member states. It's called the Council, and is under discussion at the moment, but there are very important or interesting aspects related to hospital exemption, point of care, distribution, decentralized manufacturing, for instance. So for hospital exemption, here you have the reference for the text. Importantly, there is no change of the hospital exemption definition in the text. Okay, it basically refers still, as I said, non-routine hospital medical practitioner responsibility. Hospital pharmacist is now on the list of initiation, and still for individual patients. There is no definition of non-routine in the law, so you probably will have again some guidelines afterwards, but different interpretation member state by member states. Hospital pharmacist is in scope now, it's new. There are importantly some more stringent data reporting requirements for hospital exemption on the quality, safety, and efficacy side, as well as long-term follow-up. And there will be a new repository, so database that will be available to the public about use of hospital exemption products. And finally, I think there's another one, but it doesn't work, sorry. Oh yeah. There is also an element of strengthened cross-border exchange of hospital exemption products on a case-by-case products when it is justified. Important on hospital exemption, I said there are different interpretations and implementation at national levels, so with different standards applied across member states. The European Commission is about to publish a study. It should have been published actually now, as we understand, but it's not yet, about the implementation of hospital exemption across Europe. So we will have a status of what is basically done member state by member state, and that should be available soon. So stay tuned. That's something that should be a good Bible in terms of revisiting that. And then I mentioned revision as well in the context of the pharmaceutical legislation revision about the provisions for decentralized manufacturing. Here, the recognition that decentralized manufacturing or testing of ATMPs may need to take place in sites close to patients is there in the law. It was not in the past. And an important change as well is that it limits the obligation to obtain a manufacturing authorization only to a central site, which is not necessarily the case or was not necessarily described in the GMP guidelines from 2017 for ATMPs. And for another element that is applicable to point of care, but not only, is what we call the regulatory sandboxes. And it's a new regulatory path which is envisaged in the pharmaceutical legislation when it will be in place, the revised text, in order to test new medicinal products, technologies, approaches when it's not possible to do otherwise under the current framework. And it could be used for testing point of care manufacturing, which is an important part for us. And now, if we look at the broader framework, I spoke about the alternative pathways. We spoke about very quickly the pharma legislation and the central marketing authorization. There are many other legislation that basically apply, from the MDR, medical device regulation that Christina mentioned a bit earlier, clinical trials, GMP, the SOO legislation, but also the GMOs, which are like the GMO legislations which apply to ATMPs as well. And many stakeholders are asking for change or exemption for ATMPs, but they apply that and they create some additional burden. And just wanted to use a slide from my colleague from Germany, which gives, I would say, a good snapshot of the particularities that relate to the application of the GMO law or the environmental law, not only for the marketing, for the central marketing products, ATMPs, that go for obviously through the EMA, but also for these exclusions that we discussed: clinical trials, hospital exemption, compassionate use, named patient, but off-label use. And you see that depending on which regulatory path you take in Germany, there are different paths, different articles of the law that apply and make the GMO law applicable for clinical trials, hospital exemption, or compassionate use. But when it comes to named patient or off-label use, then it's a different case. So it's just an example of also another element that ATMP developers must take into consideration and follow closely and know exactly which regulation applies. So with that, I think I have done with my part.
Thank you, Ervan, and thank you to all our speakers for sharing their valuable insights. Before we dive into our discussion session, I encourage you, if you enjoyed today's session and want more content like this, to explore our webpage. By scanning this QR code on your screen, you'll get access to recorded talks and additional resources, and the option to subscribe also to our clinical network newsletter, so you never miss an update. Now I would like to move into the discussion. During the registration, we ask you to identify your biggest challenge when establishing point-of-care manufacturing. And the responses clearly highlight some common themes. To have a look, the major hurdle cited was regulatory compliance. Then cost constraints and lack of technical knowledge followed as key barriers. And additionally, several of you pointed out challenges with standardization and reproducibility of the process. So given these insights, let's kick off the discussion with you, Christina. I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, Georgia. So we have now quite enough time to collect a question, and we will start by, we can comment also on your previous comments here from the audience. Of course, we have seen there are a lot of regulatory frameworks and guidelines, so Bernd can touch on it in a minutes. The cost consideration might also consider the cost of establishing a facility. So, for example, saving on a lower clean room level. That's something we discuss. And also, the technical knowledge is something where we're also supporting a lot, as we have a lot of programs at Miltenyi to support with trainings and protocols and creating curriculum for our customers also in case you wish. So we can also touch on that. And of course, standardization is always important. So let's kick off with the first question. I would like to ask Bernd. We see that we have a lot of attendees in this meeting that are from outside Europe. You have shown quite a general overview on GMP regulations. So can you comment how much these GMP requirements are similar in different countries? How many are universal, and what are the differences between maybe different regions in the world?
So the huge difference is really the manufacturing license. So in the US, you don't have a manufacturing license. In most other countries, you have. So therefore, in the US, it's much easier to start the clinical trial. This is a huge difference. But on the other side, we are discussing also with other authorities like China, like Hong Kong, like US, Canada, really the requirements to help there to push there the point of care.
And in terms of clean room requirements, for example, this is also can be different from country to countries, right? So what are exactly the specific requirements when you have a closed system? I think you touched on that before. Maybe you can comment on Class C and Class D.
Yeah, so the Class D is Class D is more or less a little bit more than a lab. So it's really normally the clean room class where you package your drugs product. So therefore, but to go step further, you asked in the beginning, so most of the countries worldwide are looking really on Europe. So our GMP requirements, they take over. Therefore, we have the product information file prepared, and we have seen using this product information files like Brazil, like Georgia, like South Africa, they take over our definition on clean room classes. And if you show really by the aseptic process validation that you have a closed system, then to install the Protegen in Class D clean room is possible, very good possible, and we can help really with the argumentation therefore. So here's a question from Class C clean room. So we have our clean room in Bergisch Gladbach is a clean room Class C, and then you have a weekly monitoring of the clean room classes. Would you be doing active monitoring during connection prior or to sterile filtration? No, because we have not doing a aseptic filtration step. So if you you have a sterile media, you filter into your tubing set. So you have a sterile product, you have a sterile tubing set. Therefore, it's not necessary to make a monitoring during this sterile filtration step. It's not a class A and B sterile filtration.
Perfect. Okay, so maybe another topic that can be of interest. Oh, there's a lot of comments. Let's ask one more question quickly, so to the panel. We touched on the topic that once a point of care establishes several sites, it can also be true for a company, in fact, they need to decide which is the quality system. So what is the status right now? So how can you establish that basically the product is identical in every site, and how can you prove it from a regulatory side that you are replicating the same cellular product?
So I was just last week on the MHRA point of care meeting, and there they clearly mentioned you don't need a side-by-side comparison like you do if we have central manufacturing. So their idea is really if you fulfill the specs of your final drug product, but for sure you have also do a lot of development, that you have a robust process, then you can easily release a new site into your point of care manufacturing process. That's the idea behind, and really MHRA is in the forefront of this point of care concept. And the second thing, they put the full responsibility to they call it hub and spoke model. That's the hub, so the owner of the license or the owner of the clinical trial is responsible to release the site, not the authority. This is also new.
Thank you. Georgia, so there's some more question coming in the chat.
Yes, we have an interesting question. According to EU pharmaceutical framework, decentralized manufacturing limits the obligation to obtain a manufacturer authorization only to the central site. Could you please explain in more detail what about the reporting sites that would depend on the central site, and what are your recommendations on that?
Yeah, this is especially the point which I mentioned. So yeah, the hub site is responsible. So, but nevertheless, if you have a deviation or the deviation of this, the site has to be reported to the hub site, to the owner of the manufacturing license. But you can read. So the idea, it's not written in stone in the moment. The guidance are now in draft status. If you have a deviation, the QP in the site can release the product, but has to be inform the hub site. That's the idea behind. On the other side, if you have a change in the raw material, yeah, the manufacturer of the raw material changed something, the hub site is responsible to revalidate the process and then include all these manufacturing change to all the sites.
And then there's another very interesting question. You mentioned you have a clean room with multiple prodigies for T-cell manufacturing all at once. What are your thoughts on potential mix-up in that scenario?
So you have a labeling. So every product is labeled. We have a barcode of every product. We have a barcode on every QC sample. So there is no possibility of mix-up. And the point is, you needn't have a reconcept. So if something happened, yeah, you have a bursting of a bag, then for sure you have to show, need a concept that you don't have a cross-contamination to your other manufacturing. But we have a manufacturing license to produce several CAR-T cells in the same clean room.
I think there is another question.
Yeah, it was a huge, long question. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading through also. That's why, sorry, it took a bit longer because we want to be sure we understand 100% the question. So I think what they're asking here is in the case of so they are comparing with the classical pharmaceutical product where In the case of Novartis or Gilead, the product is sent, the appearance is sent, the product is sent back to the hospital, and then is the pharmaceutical site that is responsible for liable for the product. Of course, in the case of clinical trials, slightly different in terms of responsibilities, but when it comes to a point of care manufacturing with a real GMP for ATMP, so how is this managed, right? So what is the regulation to follow? I don't know if you want to comment on that. I just briefly want to answer that there are cases like this because we know there are several sites in Europe that are trying to go as academic manufacturing for potential marketing authorization. So eventually it would be possible. But yeah, we can hear also maybe from Erwan a comment on that.
Yeah, I think, as you said, there is a pilot. There is a pilot for academics who were under the hospital exemption scheme, piloted by the EMA, supporting them if they want to go for marketing authorization. But as I read, the question is more about the liability between central and point of care in case of defect product, I guess. If there is an issue with the product. There's nothing, I would say, in the European law that basically define that. I mean, it's normally the marketing authorization holder who is, if we speak about central marketing authorization, with the liable entity. If you license out or if you do some different models of manufacturing, then the liability or responsibility, the split of responsibility also should be established in a memorandum of understanding in a contract between the different entities, I would say. I'm not a lawyer by background, I'm a toxicologist, so it's just my take on that, but it really depends on the construct and the legal agreement between the different parties.
Okay, thank you, Erwan. Is there another question? Maybe we can briefly touch in the last minute on the topic of the hospital exemption, that is quite complex. I think I can show maybe one more slide, because I think also to answer that question, the last question, it really depends, as we showed at the beginning, on what does it mean point of care. So are we talking about a different, so a type of marketing authorization, or some of the different type of early access program, or a clinical trial, and so on. So depending on that, it would be like different. And in the case of Europe, we have this hospital exemption. So maybe, Erwan, you can comment on this option.
Yeah, I think the point of care is more related to manufacturing side of what we discussed, where the hospital exemption is on the authorization and use, but effectively the manufacturing authorization is part of the hospital exemption authorization, the manufacturing authorization being given by national authorities under the hospital exemption scheme. It's basically the hospital exemption definition is, as I mentioned earlier, relates to non-routine use of a product. This non-routine, just because of its title, is very blurry, is not extremely precise, and has led to multiple degrees of interpretation from one member state to another, with more strict or restrictive definitions for some countries, and no definition at all in others. So, by the way, but with that, hospital exemption products can be more or less used in different scales, I would say, depending on the country. What I wanted to say here, I mean, there are, as I said, national level requirements. It's because of the transposition of the directive into national law. I mentioned the manufacturing authorization is given by the national competent authorities, in comparison with a central marketing authorization, where you have a full dossier for quality non-clinical, and clinical data. There you can have an abbreviated dossier, which can be or not required, which is acceptable in the case it's exceptional use normally, hospital exemption. So it's fully understandable. And also you have different traceability and pharmacovigilance requirements that apply, and therefore you have different degrees of transparency. So what's happening with the hospital exemption product or the patient that had been treated? Sometime in some countries there is no transparency at all. If the patient is still alive, is not alive, whatever, what happened to him. So there is a degree of variation in interpretation. I think is the big thing, and it's being revised. So I think,
yeah, exciting time ahead where there will be some changes, also some discussion on this topic. I think we are out of time. Georgia, you want to make some last comment?
Thank you all. It's been a fantastic discussion. As we wrap up, I want to extend a big thank you to our wonderful speakers for their insights and to all of you for active participation. We look forward to seeing you at our future events. Have a great day wherever you are.